When Louise Brooks was 9, there was a man who lived down the street, a house painter by the name of Mr. Flowers, a friend of the family. He would often leave popcorn and other treats out on his front porch.
Almost like he was trying to capture a rabbit by leaving food in a little trail up to the trap. And she took the bait, and once there, he molested her.
And her mother blamed her. What had you done to lure the poor man? Something to that effect.
Nice parenting skills, Myra. Molestation charges against the neighbor were never filed. When Louise was 13, the family moved to the big city, Wichita.
At that point, she was really bringing in some income as a dancer.
At 15, Louise, now a beautiful young woman as well as a talented dancer, found her ticket to fame.
She saw the Denishon dance troupe, and that was a very famous modern dance troupe, co-headed by Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Dennis. Not anything like ballet of the time or anything. It was really a striking sort of avant-garde dance movement. She moved to New York with the express aim of becoming a Denishon dancer, and she auditioned and was accepted right away.
Miss Ruth ran a tight ship, and she was staunchly opposed to any kind of drinking or carousing, and certainly late-night dating. And she tried to police the dancers as best she could, and did so pretty well with most of them, but not Louise.
Ruth St. Dennis dismissed her for having a superior attitude. She was dismissed before the entire company, and it was a humiliation that affected her, I think, for a long time.
So at the age of 17, Louise Brooks was on her own in the Big Apple. She definitely wasn't in Kansas anymore.
After she left the Denishon dancers, she moved to New York, lived at the Algonquin Hotel, eventually became a chorus dancer, first with the George White Scandals.
There were a lot of fans hanging out, and girls were all instructed to turn down any advances. But Louise, of course, was inclined to accept.
She was actually evicted from the Algonquin Hotel, she was told, for promiscuity.
All right, so Louise liked to, she liked to entertain. But this was 1924, and Louise's behavior just wasn't ladylike. At 18, Brooks was lured away from the George White Scandals by none other than Flo Ziegfeld, the king of Broadway.
She loved Ziegfeld, and he evidently loved her. He had to have loved her to have taken such a problematic little thing out of Louis XIV and placed her directly into the Follies.
During that period, I think she really started to determine to transform herself.
She's having all sorts of new fans every night at the Ziegfeld Follies, and one of them happened to be Charles Chaplin, who had a great 3-month torrid affair in New York City, and then never saw each other again.
She was also involved with George Marshall, who was a laundry tycoon and the future owner of the Washington Redskins. It was also in the 1920s that she met and had an affair with William S. Paley, the founder of CBS.
One of her fans had been the Paramount producer Walter Wanger. He'd seen her in the Follies. Wanger offered her a movie contract. So did MGM. And Wanger said, listen, you'd be better off at MGM. And for her usual ornery reasons, she picked Paramount. She made her first movie, a bit part in a film called Street of Forgotten Men.
26.
She was one of the most successful of the so-called junior stars. You know, a lot of them fall by the wayside. Louise was one who got wonderful reviews and drew many fans and was recognized for a wonderful talent.
Louise gets 2 thumbs up from film critic Roger Ebert.
She comes directly out of the screen and deals with the audience. There is no feeling of acting. There is a feeling of freshness. She doesn't seem to be dated like a lot of silent stars.
Louise was just as popular in Tinseltown as she was in New York. Men were clamoring for the chance to date this dark-haired beauty, and Louise was smart enough to take advantage of the situation. Playboy publisher Hugh Hefner has been a longtime fan of Louise Brooks.
I think there's no question about what she used her beauty and her sex appeal to achieve what she wanted to achieve, and what she wanted to achieve in some instances is rather like, answered prayers. Be careful what you wish for, you may get it. She got the independence for a period of time, but paid a price for it.
But one guy finally managed to hold Louise's attention, at least long enough to get a ring on her finger.
Louise met Eddie Sutherland on a picture. He was a director, a great comedy director at Paramount.
Louise and Eddie married in July of 1926. Brooks was 19. Sutherland was 12 years her senior.
He really pressured her quite a bit before she finally said yes. Almost as soon as they were married, he went off and did another picture and went off on location and just left her alone.
Probably not a good idea when you're married to someone like Louise.
I don't think either one of them particularly acted like they were married. I've never gotten the idea that marriage curbed their dating possibilities a bit, either one of them.
By 1928, Louise's marriage was a bust, and her reputation for being difficult was making her less and less appealing to Paramount's new studio chief, B.P. Schulberg. This became a problem when Louise's contract with Paramount was up. In 1973, at the age of 67, Louise Brooks sat down to discuss that fateful meeting in a film documentary about her career.
I was terribly in love with George Marshall. He was a very rich, young laundryman, and he later became the owner of the famous Redskin football team. He called me one day and he said, "Tomorrow your option comes up." He called me from Washington. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yes, Montebell, MGM called me and told me all about it." And he said, "Now look, when you go in to see Schulberg, he's going to tell you that he will keep you on at $750 a week, but he won't give you the raise in your option." And he said, "I also know that some guy in Berlin called Pabst wants you for a very famous picture, I hear. And he'll give you $1,000 a week. So you let Schulberg talk, and when he's finished, you say, 'Thank you, Mr. Schulberg, but I'll quit and go to Germany.'" And that is what I did, much to Mr. Schulberg's surprise. And of course, later he put out the story that I left because my voice was bad and didn't record well.
Louise's personality was extremely assertive, for one thing, extremely intelligent. This was her big problem with the male studio executives throughout all of her filmmaking career. None of these men could believe that any girl so beautiful could be so smart. They didn't know what to do with this woman, and she was not gentle with them.
Louise would find harmony, however, with G.W. Pabst, one of the most famous European directors of his day. He invited Louise to come to Germany and make a film with him.
She went to Berlin, and she said when she stepped off the train and onto the platform and met Pabst, that moment she became an actress, because he was the first director to ever really see in her all the possibilities that she had.
Louise's first film with Pabst was Pandora's Box. It's now considered among the greatest silent films ever made.
Well, it's about a woman who either is or isn't a prostitute. She mesmerizes the son of a publisher and the publisher himself, and a countess in one of the first really, frankly, lesbian characters on the screen. And she finally meets this guy on the streets of London. She's pretending at this point to be a prostitute. And he doesn't have any money, but she takes him upstairs anyway. She's got a heart of gold. Of course, that's the mistake she makes because it turns out to be Jack the Ripper.
The German reaction initially was not too positive because there had been a search for someone to play that role, and Lulu is a character that's quite famous in Germany. So the fact that they imported somebody from America to play this classic German trollop was controversial at the time. I think they found the right and perfect person for the role in Louise.
After completing another film in Germany, 23-year-old Louise decided to return to the United States in 1929 despite Pabst's objections. But once again, Hollywood brought out the rebel in Louise Brooks. She turned down roles in the hit films Public Enemy and Bride of Frankenstein. And when sound was added to one of her silent films and Paramount hired another actress to voice her role, she was finished.
The word was spread that she didn't have a voice and that she couldn't last in talkies, and so she wasn't officially blacklisted, but it amounted to the same thing. She stayed in Hollywood trying her best to figure out what to do. She had become a non-person in Hollywood.
Louise finally decided to return to her dance roots.
She took up ballroom dancing. She returned to the thing that she perhaps loved the most. Deering Davis was a Chicago socialite, millionaire, whom she married, and they formed a dance team, and they toured for a number of months and eventually split up.
She makes one last film in Hollywood, and it is a terrible B-Western called Overland Stage Raiders, and the only thing noteworthy about it is the leading man, who was John Wayne. And she was a grand 31 years old, and in disgust with the industry and the whole business and the phoniness, and in the fear that, as she had been warned, if she stayed out there too much longer, she was going to end up as a prostitute. She decided, I'll go back to Kansas. She opened a dance studio in Wichita in the middle of World War II. You can imagine how many students there were, and the few that there were, she managed to alienate.
She just was looking for a way to live her life, and at that time I think she just didn't really have that much direction about what she wanted to do.
She went back to New York in 1944. Had a crummy little apartment on First Avenue near the Queensboro Bridge, 59th Street. Took a couple of sales girl jobs at Saks Fifth Avenue, and was not doing well, mostly thanks to the booze.
So those were really rough times for her. She was coming to terms with her life and her failures. Even the things that she succeeded at, she saw as a failure in disguise.
The question of how Louise Brooks viewed her film career is easily answered by she didn't. She didn't view herself as having a film career. She never wanted to be an actress. She never set out to be an actress. It happened by accident. She wanted to be a dancer. She didn't place any value on it, which was why she could toss it away so casually.
Louise Brooks had a way of doing exactly as she pleased without any concern for the outcome. It was this philosophy which may have led to a brief stint in the world's oldest profession. No, not acting.
There is some evidence that she was a call girl for a while, working for a madam in New York.
The extent of her escort duties and actual prostitution really have been exaggerated. She did this for a very brief period of time.
What did last was Louise's bitterness about her Hollywood experience.
She became more and more reclusive as the years would go on. She had a select group of friends, probably nearly 20 years, that she never left her apartment at all.
Always the survivor, Louise Brooks rejoined the human race in 1956 at the age of 49.
James Card, the curator of film at Eastman House in Rochester, went looking for her and found her in New York and brought her to Rochester, showed her her old films. He fell in love with her. He took her to Paris. She was feted at the Cinémathèque Française. There was a tour of Europe. She was rediscovered.
It was during the 50s, 60s, and 70s that she began writing the essays, which appeared in numerous film magazines.
She was able to uncover the filmmaking process and the acting, directing process in a way that no one had ever done before, no one who had actually been acting in those films. Her ability with the language was something that was so extraordinary that it struck everyone who appreciated it.
Louise lived quietly, yet still reclusively for many years. Although she'd finally gained the respect and recognition as an actress she deserved and enjoyed newfound status as a gifted writer, Louise didn't seem to care.
She liked it on one level, she hated it on another because her health was failing.
She had terrible arthritis, and she was often in great, great pain. That's why she would go for days and weeks without even getting out of bed. And if she didn't have to, she would sit there and drink and read and smoke. And she was not in good health for several years, and finally died in 1985 at the age of 78. Died of a heart attack, I guess. Died of just being sick of living. I think it's probably closer to it.
Louise Brooks was quietly laid to rest in a Rochester, New York cemetery in August of 1985. What a life. So what is it about this long-forgotten star that people still find so fascinating?
I think it's clear why she's much more accepted and appreciated and understood now, which is thanks to half a century of progress in women's liberation, feminism, the male ability to tolerate an intelligent female.
It's a kind of a rediscovery for a lot of people. In other words, I think she is not one of the famous stars of Hollywood. You can see an independence and an intelligence that, combined with her beauty, were qualities that made her particularly attractive, but also one sees a self-destructive quality in it too. She fought the system from the very beginning, and she paid a price for it to some extent.
The real definitive Louise Brooks statement was the following. She once said, "Love is a publicity stunt, and making love after the first rapture is just another way of passing the time waiting for the studio to call."